mode.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the next and last, webinar of 2016 for the Performance Engineering Special Interest Group. And today we will be looking at core capabilities. All right, and today's session is brought to you by the Performance Engineering SIG leaders, of which we have Todd DeCapua, myself, Petar Paskarich, Paul Shovelin, and Chris Trimper. And I believe we have everyone here today except for Paul Shovelin, who's actually handling a client meeting. But we've got the four of us that have been leading this group for the entire year, and so far this will be presentation number 12. Today's speakers are myself and Todd DeCapua, and Todd is the Senior Director of Technology and Product Innovation for the Corporation Service Company. He has a passion with a purpose in all walks of life. He is a leader and founder of several Vivid worldwide chapters and special interest groups, and has hosted several webinars. He's a dad, wildlife conservationist, and outdoor sports enthusiast, and he has technical and business expertise and recognized domain authority in mobile, agile, DevOps, performance engineering, and the new Internet of Things. Myself, Petar Paskarich, current AVP Performance Engineer with Bank of America, and I've got over 19 years and counting now of experience in the performance engineering field and across many QA subdomains. I kind of specialize in triage and break fix and doing deep dive analysis using several tools that are available to different areas. And we'll be covering a few of those in the webinar coming up. All right. Okay, so before we get started, we have a little bit of housekeeping to handle. Let's see. If today's live session is intended for all the Vivid members, and the recording will be posted in the webinar section on the Vivid website, visible for all members. Additionally, today's slide deck and webinar recording will be made available to you, and we will send you a link via email once they are posted to the Vivid website. Okay. To enlarge this presentation pane on your screen, just click on the rectangle in the upper right-hand corner of the presentation pane, being pointed to by the red arrow. And actually, it's a blue arrow in this new set of slides, right there in the kind of the top right middle. Okay, so now we have the new webinar control panel for this presentation system. And it says that if you have any questions as we go along, please type them and send them in using the QA pane on the left side of your screen. Just simply type in your question and then click on the Ask button. To ask a question and receive them in your native language, click on the flag in the upper left corner of your screen, which will launch a language selector box. Click on the radio button next to your language and then click on Apply, and you're all set. So let's get started. And we'll pass it on over to myself here. And we will cover basically these four tenets of core capabilities, and we'll probably add a few along the way, since we are attempting a slightly different approach for today's webinar, kind of a round table session per se, consisting of actually just two people, Todd and I at the moment, and possibly Chris Trimper will jump in where he feels comfortable. But we are looking at primarily starting out with the topics of visibility, accountability, consistency, and reliability as those main drivers of performance engineering across any size enterprise. Over the years of my career and many others, these seem to be the main ones that rise to the surface as, what are those value add adjectives per se of what does it actually bring to us? So I'm going to go for this next slide here, and we're going to start right away with the topic of visibility. When I was putting this together, I wanted to try to figure out, okay, so what are some of the things that I have seen and actually used, and how's performance engineering really affected the organizations, the groupings, whether it's your local team or your business areas, that kind of stuff, and what was, at least for me, the primary benefit of performance engineering, the practice itself for those. And number one for me is actually, it's in that topic of visibility. Many of you probably know of my penchant for tooling and using deep dive tools to figure out what's going wrong in an infrastructure or an application base, down inside databases, looking across domains on how different pieces of the SAN work together and affect each other at an enterprise scale. That's it for me. I'm looking at the topics that are kind of mentioned here. Performance engineering, just by nature of the tooling and the topics it kind of covers, you're looking at the infrastructure layers. You're looking at the application itself and what's inside it. Organizational visibility, I feel, comes as a really neat byproduct, because when you're crossing all the different silos of your organization, it becomes very apparent very rapidly who you need to talk to, when you need to talk to, how you need to talk to them. It also helps uncover different processes in your organization. Because as soon as you start poking around, you start getting some pushback in some cases of, basically, you're not, let's say, following the correct procedure in order to grasp this piece of data from another team. Or you start finding out those holes where, these other teams are saying, wait, we can do this? Oh, we can ask you now for this information, that kind of thing. And then, of course, tools, whether you're looking at just the upper layers of an application or your host systems running, or going really deep dive down within your Java code or Python, .NET infrastructures, all those fun things. But having that performance engineering practice in your group, brings those tools with it, so then you do have that visibility to peer inside, and kind of like magic. But there's a lot of science behind it. And then later on in the software development lifecycle, having monitoring. When you're running tests, that's a lot of what we do is monitor what's happening during these tests, not just looking for data collection of how long did something run. It's, okay, when it was running at this time with these characteristics, what's it telling us? And again, you're using the tools for that, but it's that active monitoring while something is running that really provides a lot of information. And that's, a quick rundown of my view of this topic. I would definitely love to see what Todd has to say on this.
Yeah, thanks, Petar. I guess, when I think about visibility, when I think about performance engineering and core capabilities, if I think about visibility to start with, of being able to see or be seen as a more rudimentary definition. So I think along the lines of where, Petar, you were going, maybe if we think about it from an organizational perspective, that's another slant. So kind of out of the tools, out of some of the monitoring and those capabilities, but really, where does performance engineering play into visibility as it would relate to your organization? And I think regardless, Petar, if you're a smaller or medium-sized organization, privately or publicly held, even a very large enterprise organization, this organizational visibility is probably pretty key. So thinking about, what is the state of being able to be seen or see across the organization is probably a pretty important one. And as I think through the webinars and discussions we've had throughout the year, there's probably 2 or 3 of those webinars that you'd want to specifically hone in on. But again, whether it's thinking about this infrastructure team, thinking about your application teams, what is it, how is it that from an organizational perspective you bring this visibility of performance engineering? And I know a lot of what we've touched on is, how do I start doing performance engineering, or what are those practices that we could start adopting today fairly quickly within our organization? So some of the reasons why organizations would want to focus on performance engineering, what is the benefit, what is the value? These are questions as I think about visibility, Pithar. It's thinking about all of those elements as it would relate to organizational. Again, you've got the infrastructure teams, the application teams. Some of this also to play into some of the DevOps conversations is how is it that performance engineering helps to increase or accelerate that DevOps transformation and the visibility throughout that as well. So that would just be on this idea of visibility, some of the pieces I would think about, and some of the parts might also be thinking about. I just highlight, this is maybe a great area to remind people that they could throw in any questions that they might have so that we could address them either now or later. But back to you, Pithar.
Yeah, actually, listening to your response there, I guess the question comes up for me then concerning visibility. So having, say, performance engineering in the organization, what kind of, I don't necessarily want to say tools provide, but what kind of, I guess maybe systems do you think would really enable that visibility across the organization? Is it, more of kind of like the SDLC kind of tooling, or kind of like an ALM kind of thing, or just internal?
So I'm really hesitant to jump right in on tools, but I guess I think more of organizational and process, and maybe starting with how is it that you do it today? So when do you start thinking about non-functional requirements? Is it the old adage that Pithar, you and I have gray hair? But is it something that is it when it's in your UAT or your pre-production environment, or when it fails in production? Is that when you start thinking about non-functional requirements? Versus, is that something that we're wanting to bake in when a product owner says, I'd love to have new capability that does A, B, and C. Excellent. Well, have we thought about when doing A, B, and C, what type of, how many concurrent users are we going to experience? What types of devices will they be on? What type of response time would be expected? What's the flow, the UI experience, the user experience as far as that flow through the application into these transactions? So, for me, when I think about how does this first start to become visible within, if I looked at one of the keywords on this slide, it would be process. That might be where I would start, is how are you shifting the visibility of these capabilities and the value to your organization earlier? Again, regardless of a number of other factors, that's almost where I would start. Again, it could live within any APM tool. It could live within any, whether it's, Jira, version 1, Rally, it doesn't matter. It can live in all of those. It could live in Quality Center. It could live in Octane. Sure, but having that visibility and ensuring that visibility is something that is critical to what you're doing, it's maybe when, how are you bringing visibility on these results?
Yep. Very good. Yeah, it sounds like we're going to probably hit on this multiple times. So it sounds like even with this phase of it, the earlier the better. So it's going along with that theme of shift left early. Thank you. And I did hear from our other panelist, Chris Tremper, that he has a great example of visibility and how that affects performance engineering. So, Chris, what do you have?
Yeah, thanks, Batar and Todd. For me, visibility really is key beyond just the technical individuals doing the work. The kind of way I think of it with anything performance related is if you think of the old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village, meaning your entire corporation, your entire organization, all the roles and capabilities to mature your applications, whether they're external or internal applications, to mature them to a well-performing product. And this flows through visibility, accountability, consistency, and reliability. But from a visibility standpoint, I find that monitoring is very key because it gives, to me, at least in our organization, very easy visibility. And we actually put out all the performance metrics to both the business, IT directors, other directors as well. They may or may not read it, but the benefit there is we are dumping out all these metrics to everyone. So it's not just the developers looking at it. It's not just DBAs looking at it and application managers looking at it. It is actually everyone in the organization having the capability to look at it and understand two things. One, where are we today? How are we performing? Maybe we just released a new product, a new capability, new year end. How are we doing? But also, as we're receiving upgrades, whether we are upgrading our own products, whether we are taking vendor upgrades, we can determine how's that upgrade going to impact us? How's that change going to impact us? Is it going to make things better? Is it going to make things worse? And if it is, we have a chance earlier on, as you mentioned, shifting left in terms of focusing on performance, to get the capability to do something about it, as opposed to waiting until we're in production going, oh, crud, something went wrong.
Yeah, and you can find out about it early enough so you can actually make a difference so it doesn't impact the business or the customers.
Yeah. And I find here in this area, a challenge is having some level of visibility that actually is almost transparent, putting yourself out there and just making the numbers, the metrics, all of your data available to the individuals in your organization so that they can weigh in and actually understand it and understand the impact. Because let's face it, there are going to be times where there are going to be negative performance implications from a change. Yeah. But through this layer, we can help them understand that and understand the decisions better.
Good deal. And then hopefully no one blames the messenger and just let the data do the talking.
Unfortunately, facts are facts, and hopefully facts are our friends.
Yes. Great. So thank you so much for that insight, Chris. If anyone doesn't have anything more to add for this piece of it, I'm going to move on to the next tenet, and that's going to be around accountability. And for this particular topic, again, a lot of this you'll see the organizational piece show up over and over in the slides. But it was one of the things, I guess, early on in my career that I have seen to where whether it's just QA, let's say just QA, but starting out, very early, immature QA time period, say back in the late 90s, where going from QA into functional into performance and building up those groups and into a full performance engineering group, that organizational piece was key, and accountability was basically, I say, two ways, where we were being accountable to the business partners to say, hey, we're going to test your particular code piece and provide that checkbox certification to say, yeah, it was gone through, nothing major was found, or maybe major was found, and we're going to basically recommend that you don't go to production with this code base. But also the accountability was from those particular business units back to us, where we were trusting that they would, give us all the data we would need. They would, work with us as a partner. And that was one of the things that quickly grew, I'd say, over the first 2 to 3 years. And from talking with other colleagues, there seems to be a primary trend to where the performance engineering groups tend to grow and then exist or die on that management of the accountability between the groups and that relationship. So if you get, if it's bad results with good testing, that's usually a good thing. But if you're giving back half answers and you certify something with a major, major glaring error and it breaks in production, that's really going to hurt the team. And then you have to figure out, well, do you have a technical debt to figure out, or is it just training, or, you know, how do you fix those particular issues? Another piece in there, say, you know, supply chain accountability. And when I'm mentioning this, I'm more referring to, say, the performance group having an impact on, say, the ordering and, say, procurement of whether it's a virtual machine, your infrastructure, or physical hardware. What do those kind of, let's say, the status of getting the right hardware and software in at the right time for projects? Many times the performance groups are consulted to find out if going with, say, a hyper-converged infrastructure for your SAN and network, and working those together, and what does it exactly imply to your data center infrastructure as a whole? Can you scale there? Will it not work because of different switching patterns and stuff in your data centers? Do you have, you know, managing, say, the backup and migration strategies of even making those changes? So the performance groups should have a say in that, and, you know, and be accountable for those decisions and say, hey, this is going to work or not. It also comes in the, I guess, the day-to-day life of crossing silos, and whether, you know, you can trust the data coming across your different application groups, development groups, hardware, software, even, you know, the business side. You know, when you get information from your business analysts onto what's the expected workload change going to be from release to release, and basically, you know, validating and verifying those numbers via the tests and, you know, via some, you know, hard logic. Sometimes you can come back to one of the groups and say, hey, you are way off because this doesn't even satisfy any laws of physics, let alone the business requirement. Say, looking at business continuity as well, where we're running different scenarios and validation tests that when you're looking at, say, DR testing, if you lose half your cluster, does business go on as usual? Is it even possible? And then also covering some reporting mechanisms for, you know, you see whether it's like sales and business data coming through, looking at, you know, are these even jiving with what happened in production via production logs? Can you provide, say, benefit back to, well, say, business and your technical groups that are relying on what is the actual performance, and can it be improved, and should it be improved for the cost that would be necessary? So, you know, looking at that accountability back for cost control as well. Just a few of my opinions. Again, Todd, I'm sure you have some opinions and some pretty decent examples around this across your career as well.
Absolutely, Fatar. So there's two that jump off, I guess, the page at me immediately, and I kind of go back for a fundamental definition, not just mine, on accountable, which it may seem rather simple, but I guess de facto or condition of being accountable or responsibility. So it is one that I'm reading off of the web right now. But as I look at this slide, there's two pieces that jump off the page. You touched on one of them pretty specifically, but it's really cross-silo and business continuity. And again, in other organizations that I've worked in, that I've done consulting in, this cross-silo piece, the business continuity piece, there's a fundamental part that when I think around performance engineering and core competency related to accountability, it's across these silos in the organization. It could be across, you know, inter-development teams. It could be across infrastructure teams. It could be that application to infrastructure teams. I've often seen it also across business units. So the cross silo can become quite interesting. But it always has struck me as a significant amount of waste. And, I think Chris said it first where, the metrics don't lie. So, again, when I think performance engineering and that core competency, it's really, how is it that something as fundamental as results can help reduce that amount of waste as it would relate to all of this cross-silo noise that happens, and really focusing on what is important and the specific metrics and results that we can all see. The second one, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The second one that I mentioned was business continuity, and I think there's nothing like a real disaster to then invoke business continuity to help all of us learn, again, what are those scenarios, a performance engineering core capabilities perspective and thinking about accountability. The last thing your customer cares about is when there is a disaster and, how are you doing in executing against business continuity. What they want is to not know about your disaster. They want to ensure that they have access to your products, to your services, as they normally would at the same performance level that they've come to expect from you and from your organization. As far as accountability goes and thinking about business continuity, I think that's a real fundamental that I would want people to walk away from and think about as it would relate to their current organization, and how is it that performance engineering as a core competency is helping in that space to not only identify in business continuity, but also represent that voice of your customer to ensure a seamless transition should a disaster occur and you have to invoke some business continuity elements. So again, looking at this single slide, thinking about accountability, silo being the first one that comes to mind for me with some very real examples that I've had historically, as well as business continuity.
Very good. Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about this as well, and it's like going back, and it's like one of the events from a while ago now, bringing up the old Victoria's Secret their very first web video day that colossally failed under load. And I guess fortunately or unfortunately, I actually do know a few of the individuals that helped test that. And what was interesting about that particular thing was that all of the tests that they ran actually passed for what they were given to expect. And what ended up happening was the marketing group vastly underestimated what the need would be, being the customers pulling that video. And that's kind of where that breakdown happened. So in that accountability area, basically what it ended up was, I believe I heard, was that basically the marketing team took the dent on that particular event, was the fact that they were basically off by a factor of 5. So even though it was tested to really large numbers, the customer demand was actually just that much higher. So, even though you can test for everything you think, sometimes those unknowns win. So that was one of those times I would not have liked to have been over there, but it was an interesting one. Todd, do you have any examples like that where things have gone astray like that, where actually it was just testing was well, but things broke?
Testing was well, but things.
Yeah.
Man, I think there's so many. I'm willing to find one that I could actually put my finger on. One of my favorite ones was, and again, I think this helps maybe people starting to define a little bit more around performance engineering, because I believe strongly that performance engineering includes security, and at a large large financial institution that I had done some work. We actually launched a brand new security product that was going to be customer facing. There's both a correlation to performance and security with this as a result. But one of the things that we had done is we were only introducing a certain percentage of our customers that were logging in, and we had about 9 million customers with 180,000 people an hour logging in. And as these individuals would log into this bank, we would present them with a new security feature. That security feature, interestingly enough, enabled you to select an image as well as a passphrase for your login credentials. What was new was the image. And so thinking about this, we thought, well, okay, a user will be presented. They may be looking through a few of these, selecting one that would be relevant, and then moving on. In actuality, and I think, Patar, this hits specifically on your question to me, the average file sizes were only, 50 to 80K each, and we presented 5 at a time, but there was up to 100. So many of our customers went through all 100 of these images at least one time, serving up that type of a payload. Again, a significant majority of our customers, at that time it was greater than 15%, were actually on mobile devices. So that introduced some other paradigms that we had not yet experienced. But that would be a very simple example of how here is a seemingly easy security element that you're introducing to the benefit of your end user. You're introducing a very small percentage of those users at a time and thinking, well, these are small images, should not be a big deal. The behavior of your end user. But coming back to the topic of accountability, where does the accountability for that incident occur? Because believe it or not, it did actually choke out both of the pipelines that were coming into that primary data, and we needed to go ahead and remediate that incident. We did not have to initiate business continuity, but we very quickly saw the impact that was having, not only a small subset of users, but all users that were trying to access the site.
Yeah, so but I wonder whether that falls into the accountability, I guess, chain of possibly even the architects. But just looking at the analysis around how would you even detect that without going into some very fine detail, and actually even back during that time period, you would almost even have to go back and create those mobile kind of protocol delays to even start testing for that. So, yeah, that's an interesting problem to have there.
And most importantly, I think, is from a performance engineering core competency perspective, it's thinking about that incident, thinking about the accountability across the organization, because it's not just one team, it's not just one individual, it's across the silo, it's absolutely having to do with business continuity, organizational, again, all of those different elements, and that is not a unique experience that any of us are having, but it's right. Changing the way we think about the core competency of performance engineering and how that can be applied.
Very good. Yeah, and basically it touches everything apart across all the organizations, and having basically having that visibility and view into everything that could affect that particular process, and then how do you manage it? Okay, I think with that, I'm going to press on to our third topic here, which does go with this, consistency. How does performance engineering bring consistency to your workflows in general, whether it's the business, inside your local performance teams, your QA teams, whatnot. Looking at that consistency of business processes and design of those processes, and what do you bring to your customers to actually work through your sites, or whether you're processing claims or loans or whatnot. Going for consistent quality. across the entire platform that you're looking at. The next three are actually very important to me over the years. Looking at consistency of your application environments, the infrastructure environment, and then also that configuration management across both of those. I've seen many times where you've got, say, your 3 or 4 test environments at your lower environments pre-production. And even if you take into account that they are, say, newer code in those lower bases moving up through, so you're going to have some configuration change. By the time you get into your PT environments, if you are lucky enough to have them, those should be pretty close in matching your production environments. Because you're going to basically go from what you're testing, what you think you're testing, into production to goes live. Many times there are configuration settings that are completely missing in your environments. And at some point, you really do need to go and do comparisons to see whether you're looking at, say, JBoss configuration settings, IBM WebSphere application server configurations. One little field marked to a no can potentially, cause the whole environment not to behave correctly or even start. Looking at the configuration, say, of your visibility tools, even whether you're using, say, like Java agents to do your deep dives. But the goal for all those toolings and having that configuration management and looking at that is basically to provide that consistency. So what you're testing should equate to what you're going to see live in production when you actually do roll it over. One of the, the neat features some corporations have is they will actually rotate DNS entries. So then you can say, okay, production for this particular cycle is this one set of DNS and test is another. But then after, say, post-release, you're basically migrating your pre-production environment right into production. And then after basically 2 cycles of that, you're pretty honed in on like equals like. It's a tough one to manage, and I've only seen it at some smaller companies that had the privilege to see that with. But it's those kind of processes that will provide that consistency. One of the big pluses that we built at one of the other companies I was with for a number of years really was around consistency of workflow of the teams. Once we created, say, your engagement model and the engagement documents that go into, say, how do you work with new business processes coming into the group to test, setting up the documentation that says, hey, we require these 10 or 12 things minimum to define what your test scenario should look like. And the importance there is that it's the same set of questions across all the different groups. And over time, that pretty much it leads to a lot of success because the large number of groups interfacing with your performance team actually have a set way of doing business with you. And it makes things streamline a lot better. And then overall, the quality starts improving and it just goes from there. And I'd say on average, I've seen as those consistent processes that the teams engage in, say, last over about a 3-year time period, I'd say that's when you start seeing the bulk of the fruit of that labor. It was pretty amazing transformation process, especially at one insurance company where when we first implemented those kind of consistent workflows to the group, how chaotic just the act of testing was handling, say, 3 or 4 applications per work group, moved quickly then into, over that course of that 3-year period, to where we were doing like 300 to 350 application tests per a small group of about 8 people at that time. So it really plays a lot. That's one of those benefits where immediately they can say, oh yeah, we can take a smaller performance group and get a huge amount of productivity out of it. And with that, I think that's where I'm going to stop for now. And Todd, what do you feel on this topic?
Man, I feel a lot on this topic. So I think this has been a source of a lot of pain over the years for me is consistency. So again, of that, the more definition like on this, conformity in the application of something, typically that which is necessary for the sake of logic, accuracy, or again, that I just typed consistency into Google and it came back with, and I'm kind of thinking, wow, were they listening in on our conversation right now? Because when I think about, for the sake of logic, accuracy, or fairness, and I look at the words, the 6 words or successive words that you have on this slide, a lot of this pain has come from things like the application environment, the infrastructure environment, and also configuration management. One of these areas, I don't know if people go out to Beacon, but if you look at techbeacon.com, there's a menu item across the top for performance. And just yesterday, there was an article published by Paul Merrill, which, Qatar, I don't know if you've seen this yet. It's titled 3 Highly Effective Strategies for Managing Test Data. And as far as I'm concerned, consistency in test data is one of the big challenges. I may put it under quality on this slide. But again, that was just one that caught my eye yesterday, and I thought, well, that would be very relevant for this conversation. But as I the application environment, the infrastructure environment, again, in the types of organizations that we work in, this is a big deal. The consistency of the environment as it would relate to performance engineering and core competencies also becomes to play a major role in things like configuration management. So whether you're going down the Agile path or you've matured into the DevOps path, leveraging this integration, continuous development, continuous deployment, and how that relates to all of these different environments and the consistency, it really is an interesting challenge because, where I've got many, many development teams in my business unit, that's just one perspective from an enterprise and the consistency across the enterprise compared to another business unit of mine and the many development teams that they have. And what is that standardization that we've wanted to apply so that we can have consistency for all the right reasons? So again, just a few ideas there. A very tactical one around test data and consistency, and where does that fall? I think it falls in the quality piece, thinking about the application and infrastructure environments, and then into configuration management. Again, how is it that I can have that higher quality? How is it that I can deliver a faster time to market and ultimately bringing the higher value capabilities to my customers faster? So again, just a few ideas around consistency.
Great. And would you think there was anything glaring missing off this particular topic slide? Or is that pretty much, you think, would cover what we need to there?
Well, I mean, it's interesting when you first start speaking to someone about performance, and I did see one of the questions that came up was about performance testing to performance engineering. But I think consistency in the way that tools leverage, the way that scripts are created, the way that scripts are maintained, all of that, again, at a very tactical, more testing-related conversation, is quite significant when it comes to consistency because, again, whether you're maintaining scripts or maintaining test data, maintaining environments, maintaining your release management trains, all of these pieces become crucial in being able to deliver, again, quick, high quality and high value.
Totally agree on that. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was one I kind of glossed over there. I guess it goes in with that. It goes very well with your data example for that. Yeah, just let alone looking at scripts and having the ability to have, whether it's a common naming convention across your transactions or whatnot, goes a huge way into maintaining that consistency in your testing, and which is important because you want the output of our testing to actually mean something long term, and that's where you get that benefit. So good deal, thank you. We're going to go on to the next slide, which is our last topic we're going to cover for this, and that's around the core add-on value for performance engineering of around reliability. So now we go from being consistent with what we have, but now is it reliable? And I'm kind of lumping together the phrase I picked up over my past recent job search of there appears to be a large number in demand for site reliability engineers as well, as I've heard, which is very important because we want to make sure the sites stay up and perform reliably. And that goes in there with availability as well. Sometimes just having a cluster is not enough. If you have something downstream, that's preventing the site from being available as well or running correctly. We're looking at the reliability around performance characteristics as well. So, is your business process working the same way at, say, 1 p.m. after lunch as it does at 3 a.m. When nobody's really using your app? Looking at, say, production importance. That's the one where, I'm saying you have an application that's critical to your business or your customers or whatnot. Now we're looking at, say, different, say, it used to be, say, SOAP calls into your SOA environments. Now we're looking at microservices and Lambda functions where you got, it's third-party hosted pieces of code, but they can be extremely critical to your application and your users. So those have to be there all the time and reliable. When you go out to call that, say, 3-second SLA, as performance engineers, we better know that is that average 3 second, is that 90 percentile 3 second, or is that a max? There are several corporations that even run tighter than that, down to if you're off by basically 10 milliseconds, it's considered a fail in certain response times. And it really depends on what you're processing. If you're, say, like a Visa processor right around now, Christmas time, you really want those numbers to be low and consistent, so you maintain processing order. And then also, we're looking at reliability for your customer-facing applications. That's the face of your business. And that performance engineering group within your organization kind of is one of your last stops to say, hey, this is going to work or this is not going to work. And, should we, spend an extra 2 days on fixing this particular database index or looking at, the interface timings between several tiers, not just one anymore. What can we expose on that using our other visibility tools? It all goes into, basically your performance engineering group in charge of, its reliability, the consistency, and everything else, the accountability and providing that visibility layer. This I guess I'm kind of grouping this into, it's kind of like that cream layer that overrides everything. We're expecting our infrastructures and environments to be working and working well all the time. And that's usually, the performance engineering group is usually where that emphasis is placed. Todd, I'll throw this last one back to you before we wrap up a few things and take some questions as we go.
Sure, thank you, Patar. So again, when I think of reliability, wanted to get a basic definition. One of them here is the quality or state of being reliable. The second one is the extent to which an experiment, test, or measuring procedure yields the same results on repeated trials.
Yep.
So for me, it's interesting because I think both of those would apply as I would think about, performance engineering and core capabilities. So the first one is really thinking about the quality or state of being reliable. The second one is every time you would run an experiment test or measuring those procedures, you would yield the same results on repeated trials. So I think many people jump to the first one, which is, again, is my mobile app, is my site, is my product, is my service, are those reliable to my end user? Are they reliable to my stakeholders? Again, that thinking more the first part, so that quality or the state of being reliable. One of the things, I guess, in this area, Pitar, is I know my publisher, O'Reilly, had published a book back in March of this year with a number of contributors, including Betsy from Google, and it was titled Site Reliability Engineering, and the subtitle is How Google Runs Production Systems. So it's a good read. There's electronic versions of this available. It goes into many of the specific details that we've mentioned, again, with a focus on that quality or state of being reliable. So how is it that Google ensures their systems are reliable? That's been a pretty interesting read, and again, for the 4 individuals who contributed on that book, it's been interesting to have conversations with them as well. On the second part of this definition, for me as a performance engineering and thinking about some of the core capabilities that we want to have, that same results on repeated trials is really a core capability. I mean, if you run the same test over and over, time and time again, and you get different results, again, you have no baseline to be able to stand on. So again, that consistency piece maybe plays in a little bit here as well. I think for the items that you've got listed here, the production importance piece, the customer-facing piece, I would tend to look at that as well. So again, okay. I've spoken a little bit about the shift left aspects of performance engineering, but I also don't want to forget the shift pieces. So, how is it that you're monitoring things in production and also monitoring the same things pre-production, but understanding, those customer-facing systems, understanding which ones are really critical of an importance level for you in production to ensure that reliability, or again, yielding those same results time over time for all of your end users. How do you get that type of reliability and build that in? Because I think regardless of if it's this book or if you go to any one of your stakeholders or any of your shareholders, they're going to understand that type of reliability, that they should be getting the same results on repeated trials. And if you can do that and attain that quality level, you will then also have that state of being reliable.
Very well. Yeah, I totally agree on all of that. Just trying to think, I guess, out loud here. What more there can be around actually, say, measuring that reliability outside of just, say, the normal monitoring solutions. I guess that gets more into the reporting aspect that we mentioned earlier, to actually come up with numbers around how do we prove that, that the site is that reliable. Whether you're looking at, I guess, we could add in there that some of the SEO characteristics would also apply there. Does that sound reasonable? Because you're looking at, how does the customer feel about your site as well?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think this kind of does get back into some more of the fun. You need to set some reasonable expectations for monitoring. Again, sometimes the more the better. The other piece that I think we often forget is this idea of black box versus white box testing and monitoring. Again, what is it for this scenario that we're caring about? The third element I would also suggest just came to mind is symptoms versus causes. So, how many times when you or I or others think about reliability, we really focus on that symptom. But where a performance engineer truly earns their stripes is in the ability to start identifying not just the one cause, but start identifying the multiple causes that led to those symptoms.
Very good point. Yeah, because very rarely is it ever just one little piece of change or some problem. It's usually a whole concert of issues all at once that cause that.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, I think at this point we're wrapping near the top of the hour, and I think now we can, go to answering some questions. It looks like we have had a few come in today, and I think we saw one earlier too, which was the question around, what is the best way to move from performance testing to performance engineering? And I know we've both heard this a lot across the last few years, especially since it's been the emphasis of the SIG, which is good. So it looks like, ever increasing amounts of engineers are wanting to make this transition. Todd, would you like to start this one and I can add on toward the end?
Sure, absolutely. And I think for the key topics that, Petar, you put together for this core competence conversation, it may be a good way to start answering that question of, how can I transform myself from performance tester to performance engineer? And, basically thinking about these four core capabilities of visibility, accountability, consistency, and reliability. Oftentimes as a performance tester, it's more of thinking about the fundamentals of the script, of the flow, of some of the data elements. But, we just ran a test. We had 1,000 virtual users. This specific transaction, these are the results. Here's how many transactions per second, and really focusing on that response time. So it's changing your thinking to now let me think about these four core capabilities, the value to the organization, bringing that visibility, accountability, consistency, and reliability. That would be probably a good starting point. The other piece that, as we've spoken to many other experts as well in the industry, it seems like there is no guidebook yet for performance engineering, or how do I transform to a performance engineer. This becomes more of that of a mentorship. So Petar and I are mentors in this space, as well as many others in the world. But reach out to people, ask them if they would be willing to mentor you to move from a performance tester to a performance engineer. And I guess just lastly, Petar, I will put in a shameless, but Shane Evans and I finally had wrote and published a book. I guess it was finally published in June or July, titled Effective Performance Engineering. And again, it's not going to transform you into a performance engineer. I believe it helps to lay some of the groundwork and some of the fundamentals of making that shift. Again, covering many of these core capabilities and points, but also giving you some very specific elements that you can start to dig into immediately. So again, it's from O'Reilly, titled Effective Performance Engineering. You can get a free electronic copy off of the O'Reilly website, or just go to effectiveperformanceengineering.com. You can get access to free copies there, not only from O'Reilly, but also Hewlett-Packard Enterprise also sponsored the book. So back to you.
All right, great. Hey, thank you so much, Todd, for that answer. And I think I'm going to leave it there with that. And since we're now at the top of the hour, I will add that I think we're going to close out that with the questions. And any of the questions that have been submitted that we have not answered, we will be getting back to you via email with some answers around those. And we thank you for attending today. And this is, again, brought to you via the HPE Vivid, and it's the www.vividworldwide.org is our website address, and you can stop by there and grab the audio replay and the slides for this webinar today later on. And you can also join for free, register, and that would be very welcome. And then we also have an event coming up here for the Post-Discover Summit in 2017. So it's basically 9 webinars in 3 days on ADM and ITOM. And it's currently going to be held January 30th through February 2nd, so 2017. So it's the Post-Discover London wrap-up. The link is on the slide there, and should be a very nice event. The next slide. And so we have, thank you for attending our webinar today. And at the very end of this here, there will be a survey that will pop up concerning the performance engineering SIG and any kind of, let's say, suggestions you would have for us. And we're looking for, possibly where we'd like to go in the future. So thank you very much for attending today, and please consider filling out the survey. Thank you very much, and have a happy holidays.